Has this ever happened to you where silence, not fury, is what haunts him most? Where your absence echoes louder than any scream, and the very space you used to fill becomes the mirror in which he finally sees himself. There is a moment, not when you beg, not when you cry, not when you rage, but when you walk away with calm, with grace, with eyes that no longer seek, that a man's soul begins to tremble. Not because you hurt him, but because in that slowness, in that sovereign departure, you awaken something ancient in him. The anima, the feminine force he has repressed, denied, and projected onto you all along. He doesn't forget the chaos. He forgets the pleading. But what he never forgets are the 3 words you said without bitterness, without need, without ego. I see you. Not, I love you. Not, I need you. But, I see you. And suddenly, the mask he's worn his whole life cracks. Because to be seen, truly seen by a woman who has already done the work to see herself, is the most disarming experience a man can endure. Most men live their lives in projection. They confuse power with control. They chase admiration, conquest, applause, but none of it touches their soul. None of it confronts the little boy beneath the armor. The one still longing for approval. The one terrified of being known. And then you walk into his life. Not to complete him, but to reflect him. And it is in your reflection that he meets his shadow. Carl Jung wrote that every man carries within him the eternal image of the woman, not the literal woman, but the archetype, the anima. She is not gentle by default. She is not submissive. She is the storm and the stillness, the ocean and the flame. And when a real woman embodies her not to please, not to seduce, but simply to be, she becomes a mirror to the part of the man he has disowned. But here's what he doesn't expect. She won't stay in a house built on projections. She won't beg for love carved from wounds. She'll see him, and when he cannot meet her in that depth, she'll leave. And the moment she does, time stops for him. Not because she left, but because she saw him before she did. You see, a man can endure being hated. He can even survive being ignored. But to be seen fully, deeply, without flattery, without manipulation, and still lose her, that is the wound that never closes. Because those 3 words, I see you, were never spoken to flatter him. They weren't whispered to win him. They were spoken as a final offering, a sacred mirror held up in love, not attachment. And when he wasn't ready to see himself, that mirror became unbearable. He may act indifferent. He may move on, quickly, recklessly. He may even convince himself he's relieved. But the truth? No matter how many bodies he touches, he will lie awake in the dead of night remembering the one woman who didn't just love him, but saw him. Not as a fantasy, not as a fixer-upper, but as a soul wrapped in ego, longing, contradiction, and pain. That kind of love does not flatter the ego. It fractures it. And only the brave welcome that kind of love the rest run. And you are no longer chasing. Because you've learned what it means to see. You've done the shadow work, faced the hungry need to be chosen, tended the little girl in you who begged to be enough. You no longer give your worth in exchange for closeness. You no longer shrink to fit his comfort. You see him because you've seen yourself. And now you no longer need to explain. You no longer need to prove your value. Because love built on explanation is not love, it's negotiation. This is the power of a woman who chooses herself. When she says, I see you, it is not a tactic. It is not a plea. It is a rite of passage, a silent blessing, an invitation, and a warning. And when he cannot meet that invitation, when he resists the depth she offers and clings instead to surface pleasures, she does not beg, she does not plead, she simply turns slowly, gracefully, and walks. He doesn't realize it then. But one day after the distractions fade, after the noise dies, after his pride breaks, he will remember. Not the day she left, but the day she saw him. Before she did, and those words, I see you, will become his reckoning. There is a silence that follows after she leaves, not the absence of sound, but the roaring hush that fills a man's world when the echo of her perception still lingers in every corner he once occupied with performance. He may return to his routines. He may cloak himself in distractions, a louder laugh, a tighter grip on his ambition, another woman's fleeting admiration. But the mask no longer fits. It has cracked in her gaze. Because when she said, "I see you," she didn't just glimpse his best parts. She saw what he hid. The shadow that archetypal force Jung described as the parts of ourselves we exile into darkness. She didn't shame it. She didn't flinch. She simply named it without judgment. And that is what burns. You see, most of the world loves the mask. It applauds the illusion. But she, the awakened feminine, doesn't fall in love with a man's armor. She loves from the marrow, not the mask. And when she gives that kind of love, it either awakens him or terrifies him. There is no neutrality in the face of such deep seeing. It confronts everything he thought love was supposed to be: convenient, flattering, easy. But her love is sacred, disruptive, initiatory. It breaks the cycles. It dares him to meet himself. And when he doesn't, when he avoids, dismisses, deflects, he thinks he's escaping her, what he doesn't understand is that he's abandoning his own soul. Because she was never just a woman. She was the symbol of what he could become. The Stoics said that no man is free until he has conquered himself. But what they forgot to mention is that sometimes it takes her to hold up the sword, not to fight him, but to pierce the illusion. A woman who has done her inner work, who has danced with her grief, kissed her insecurities on the mouth, stared into her abandonment and refused to run, becomes more than desirable. She becomes divine, not in some spiritual fantasy, but in the blood and bone reality of what it means to love without attachment, to walk without chasing, to offer herself fully and still walk away when the soul is not met. This is not bitterness. It is not revenge. It is the sacred grief of the feminine reclaiming herself. And that grief, he will feel it long after she's gone. She will not destroy his life. She will destroy his illusions. And in the ruins, he will either build a temple to his true self or wander the desert searching for the echo of her voice. Because the woman who sees him and still walks away haunts him more than the woman who stayed and begged. She represents the moment he could have become something greater if only he had faced himself. What do you think happens to a man who has touched such truth but turned away? He becomes restless, not just for her, but for something unnamed. Because once the soul has been seen, it cannot unsee itself. Once the ego has been cracked, it cannot fully harden again. And so, even if she never returns, she awakens in him the ache to become worthy, not of her, but of the version of himself she once glimpsed. The tragedy is this. Most men wait too long. They try to return once the mirror has shattered, once the bridge has collapsed. They realize the value not of what she did, but of who she was being conscious, rooted, unshakable, not demanding love, but embodying it. By then, she is no longer waiting. Because her journey did not end when she left him. It began. She crossed the threshold from dependency to sovereignty, from longing to liberation, from being the mirror for his wounds to being the guardian of her own soul. And in that journey, she no longer needs to convince anyone of her worth. She no longer seeks to be chosen because she has chosen herself. But she remembers. Not with longing, not with regret, but with the kind of bittersweet clarity that only shadow work provides. She remembers the boy and the man, the ache behind his pride, the tenderness beneath his detachment. She saw it all and still walked. And he remembers the moment he was seen, the moment no woman had ever dared to name the parts he hid, the moment the armor grew heavy and the eyes he avoided were the only ones that mattered. He may never say it aloud. He may never come back. But in the quiet, when the world is asleep and the soul speaks loudest, he repeats those 3 words to himself. She saw me. And that, more than anything, becomes the beginning of his reckoning or his ruin. There is a certain kind of man who will spend his whole life searching for the woman he once stood before and couldn't face. He may not know it consciously, not at first, but his choices begin to reveal the hunger. In every woman he touches after her, he searches for that same gaze, the one that saw through him, not to shame, but to invite. But that kind of gaze cannot be fabricated. It does not come from beauty. performance, or charm. It comes from depth, and depth is earned. It is birthed in silence, grown through grief, sculpted in solitude. A woman cannot fake that power, and a man cannot forget it. And so he spirals. On the surface, successful, capable, desired, but beneath it all, a quiet fracture runs through his center. He tasted truth and turned from it. And now, no matter how bright the lights, how loud the applause, how warm the body beside him, something always feels slightly out of reach, slightly unreal, slightly unearned. The reason is simple. The soul knows when it has betrayed itself. When he left the woman who saw him, he didn't just lose her. He lost the mirror that could have shown him the path to his own wholeness. He rejected not her love, but the confrontation with his own shadow. And the price of that avoidance is a life lived on the surface, forever haunted by depth. Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And so he fills his days with conquest, competition, comparison, anything but stillness. Because stillness would remind him of her, and she would remind him of himself. But what of the woman? She is not waiting in bitterness. She is not hoping for redemption. She is becoming. After she leaves, her power is not found in proving him wrong or making him regret. Her power is in the way she rebuilds herself without noise, without spectacle. In the way she returns to her own body, her own voice, her own rhythm, as if she were always meant to be her own center. She does not post her healing. She lives it. Quietly, relentlessly, sacredly. She meets her own shadow, the parts of her that once chased validation, once begged to be chosen, once made a home in the ache of his absence. And she doesn't shame those parts, she integrates them. She becomes whole not in spite of her pain, but through it. This is the feminine rewilded. Not soft for approval, not hard for defense, but fluid, grounded, wise, unapologetic. And the most beautiful part? She doesn't need revenge. Her radiance is the reckoning. Because the moment a woman no longer performs for love is the moment she becomes unforgettable. That is why he remembers her. Not because she left, many have left. Not because she loved, many have loved. But because she saw him and then walked away anyway. Not out of anger, but out of truth. He wasn't ready, and she finally was. That moment becomes his psychological crucible. He may laugh with others, but her silence lingers. He may chase novelty, but her stillness echoes. He may wear new masks, but none feel as real as the one that cracked in her presence. Because he remembers what it felt like to be known, not desired, not admired, but known. And he remembers the 3 words she spoke without trembling, without tears. I see you. She didn't need to explain. She didn't need to win. Because truth doesn't perform, it just is. And now, he is left with the ache of that truth, a truth he rejected. A truth he may one day seek again, but only if he finds the courage to meet his own shadow. Until then, her image walks beside him, not as punishment, but as possibility. The version of himself he could become if only he stopped running. And in that haunting, he might finally realize the wound was never her leaving. The wound was being seen and not rising to meet it. He may not say it aloud, not to his friends, not to his therapist, not even to himself, but her presence lives in the quiet corners of his life, in the gaps between achievement and peace, in the silence after the applause, in the soft ache that follows every fleeting pleasure. Because no amount of movement can erase what the soul has been called to become. What does it mean to be truly seen by the feminine? It is not comfort. It is not validation. It is confrontation cloaked in compassion. It is the spiritual initiation into the truth of who he is, beyond his titles, beyond his status, beyond his bravado. The anima, as Jung described her, is not merely the feminine principle within a man. She is the doorway to wholeness. But that doorway often arrives wearing a woman's face, a woman who does not shrink, a woman who does not beg, a woman who refuses to mother his boyhood or applaud his detachment, a woman who, by standing firm in her own wholeness, exposes his fragmentation. And if he is not ready, he will call her too much. He will say she's too intense, too emotional, too spiritual, too demanding. Not because she is, but because her presence demands that he grow. And growth, to a man addicted to ego safety, feels like death. So he flees, and she walks. Not with sorrow, but with sacred clarity. Because she knows now, she is not here to rescue. She is not here to prove. She is here to reflect and then release. There was a time when she would have stayed, when she would have bent, softened, shrunk herself just enough to remain digestible. She would have whispered reassurance to his frightened masculinity. She would have dimmed her fire so he wouldn't feel its heat, but no more. Because she finally understood every time she stayed in a place that required her to abandon herself, she was agreeing to a slow death. So now, when she sees that he cannot meet her, not with shame, not with anger, she simply blesses the space between them and leaves. Her departure is not a tantrum. It is a funeral for illusions. And he doesn't understand it at first. He thinks she's playing hard to get, testing his patience, proving a point, but time passes and she does not return. And that's when the silence becomes unbearable, because he begins to feel something foreign, his own longing, not for her body, not for her comfort, but for the man he glimpsed in her eyes. He remembers how she looked at him when she said those 3 words, not with pity, not with desperation, but with knowing. I see you. And in that moment, he was naked, not in skin, but in soul. He felt both exposed and exalted, terrified and honored, because for once, someone had touched the depth of him without trying to fix or flee. And still, he wasn't ready. His ego tightened, his fear screamed, and he did what countless generations of uninitiated men have done before him. He ran. But her gaze remains. Even in memory, it burns, it strips, it reminds. Because when a man has been seen by a woman who knows herself, no illusion will ever feel like truth again. And that is the secret torment he carries. Not that she left, but that he lost access to the version of himself she awakened. She didn't just mirror him, she summoned him. And he faltered. Now, every woman he meets is measured against the one who didn't need him, didn't chase him, didn't mold herself for him, but still chose to see him. And when she left, she didn't slam the door. She left it open, not as an invitation, but as a reminder. The way is always there, but you must choose to walk it. Meanwhile, she continues her journey deeper, higher, freer, not out of spite, not even out of protection. But because she finally understands the truth, Jung, Seneca, and all the sages tried to whisper through the centuries, that love without self is not love, it is bondage. And she has burned the rope. It is in the aftermath, not the moment of her departure, but in the echo that follows, that the real unraveling begins. Not for her, for him. The unraveling is quiet. It doesn't look like devastation. It looks like distraction. Overcommitting to work, overindulging in pleasures, collecting shallow affirmations like armor. But none of it shields him from the truth she awoke. You see, when a man is loved by a woman still trapped in her wounds, he can remain comfortably asleep. She will ask for his presence while excusing his absence. She will explain his coldness to her friends. She will turn his indifference into a puzzle she believes she can solve. But when a woman has faced her own darkness, when she has sat in the ashes of abandonment, stitched herself together from the inside, and returned not as someone needing love, but as someone embodying it, that woman becomes the end of every illusion he has about himself. She does not ask for much, only for what is real. And that is what terrifies him most. Because she no longer chases, she no longer negotiates for scraps, she no longer believes that her love is something to be earned. She knows now her love is a gift and one must rise to receive it. She offers that gift once, openly, fully. And when it is not met, not with grand gestures, but with sincerity, presence, humility, she withdraws it, not as punishment, as protection. Of her soul, of her sacred fire. That is what he never saw coming. He thought she would fight for him. He thought her silence was temporary. But days turned to weeks, and she did not return. Because she wasn't gone in rebellion, she was gone in truth. And the truth is, She outgrew the part of herself that needed to be chosen. Now he sits with that silence, the one that once felt like victory, but it begins to gnaw at him. Because it's not just her absence, it's the absence of himself that he cannot escape anymore. She was the mirror, the last one he trusted before the distortion cracked. And without her reflection, he no longer knows what is real. He begins to feel it in ways he doesn't understand. He flinches when someone touches the place she once held. He becomes angry when his comfort is questioned. He finds himself restless, hungry, empty, and ashamed for reasons no one else can see. But she would see it. She always did. And that is the wound. The real wound is not her departure, it is the presence she held before she left. A presence that said, "I know who you are beneath the armor." A presence that whispered, "You do not have to perform for love." A presence that radiated, "I see your fear, and I will not soothe it with lies." That is what he lost. Not just her body, her laughter, her love, but the invitation to become. And the longer he runs from it, the louder it gets. There is no woman who can replace her. Not because she was perfect, not because she was unattainable, but because she was rooted in herself, in truth, in the knowing that love is not a transaction but a mirror. And the irony? All she wanted was for him to see himself the way she did. But he couldn't. And so she walked not in anger, but in mercy. For him, for herself. Because when a woman reaches the place where her soul refuses to be a savior, she becomes free. And that freedom is what he misses most. Not because she gave it to him, but because in her presence, he almost touched it in himself. But now it's gone. Or so he thinks. Because the truth she carried remains. I see you. 3 words. Spoken without threat, without plea, without condition. 3 words that now live in him like a buried compass, pointing not back to her, but inward. The question is no longer, will she come back? The question is, will he rise to become the man she saw? And the answer will either heal his lineage or doom it to repeat. There comes a point long after the silence has set in, long after her footsteps have faded, long after the world has moved on, when a man sits alone with the echo of his own reflection. Not the one he cultivated for the world, but the one she showed him, the one beneath all performance, the one he didn't know how to hold when it was laid bare before him. This is the reckoning. Not a storm of rage, not a collapse of pride, but a soft, unbearable awakening. He begins to understand her leaving wasn't punishment, it was prophecy. It foretold a version of him yet to be born, one she knew existed even when he didn't. She never demanded he become that man. She simply held the vision, and in doing so, offered him the highest form of love, belief without control. But belief, when met with fear, feels like pressure, and pressure without courage becomes resistance. So he turned away. He chose comfort. He chose delay. He chose a life that didn't ask him to change. And now he bears the quiet consequence not of rejection, but of unfulfilled potential. You see, men like him do not forget the women who saw them. Because she didn't just witness his light, anyone can do that. She witnessed his shadow and didn't flinch. She saw the boy he hides, the wounds he mocks, the dreams he buried. And she met them not with rescue, but with reverence. This is the difference. She didn't come to save, she came to stand. She stood in love that required no ownership, in power that asked for no submission, in truth that didn't tremble. And when he couldn't meet her there, not because he was weak, but because he was unready, she did not make excuses, she did not wait, she did not shrink her knowing. She walked. And in doing so, she offered him the greatest initiation of all, loss as transformation. Carl Jung taught that the path to wholeness is not found in comfort. It is found in the tension between what we are and what we could be. That tension is sacred. And it is in that gap that a man must build himself not to win her back, but to meet his own soul. Now, if he is wise, if he is willing, he begins the real journey. He turns inward. He sheds the armor, faces the boy, grieves the time wasted, confronts the lies he believed about masculinity, about strength, about what love demands, He reclaims his anima, the sacred feminine within, not through seduction, but through surrender. He learns to feel again, to hold pain without fleeing, to speak truth without weapon, to show up without mask. Not because she requires it, she's already gone, but because he finally sees what she saw. And that is the miracle. For a woman like her never leaves a man the same. She is not a memory. She is a mirror. She is not a loss. She is a threshold. He may never see her again. He may never speak the words he never said. But in the quiet rebirth of his integrity, in the still forging of his inner strength, she is there, not as ghost, but as guide. And her gift was not her love. It was her leaving. Because in that departure, he met the place where longing becomes growth, where grief becomes awakening, where the ego dies and the soul begins. And her, she walks on, not with bitterness, not even with nostalgia, but with grace. She no longer carries the hope of his return. She carries the knowing of her worth. She has become the woman who no longer bends for love, who no longer trades depth for closeness, who no longer waits to be chosen. Because she has chosen herself again and again in silence, in solitude, in sovereignty. And in doing so, she has become the kind of woman a man never forgets. Not because she stayed, but because she saw, and when she left, she didn't take anything from him. She left him with everything he needed to become.